By the way, Rav Asher Weiss
is great. No?
favorite of the answers we've seen.
Yes. Okay, so maybe let's start there. I agree with you also. I thought, so let's summarize what we did yesterday, right? So we have three Gemaras that have to be contended with in terms of the status of Malchuyot Zichronot Shofarot. We have the Gemara in Tet Zayin, which is Agadic, but says Amra Torah. Then you have the Gemara on Lamed Bet, which sounds a little bit more halachic and says Idkar Rachmana, and then quotes a pasuk, which is lacking on Tet Zayin. And then you have Lamed Dal and Lamed Bet, which says that if you have the choice between going only, right, the only choice is between somewhere where they're going to blow shofar, even suffix, and somewhere where they're going to say the brachot, you choose even the suffix shofar over the vaday brachot, because the brachot are derabanan and the shofar is d'oraita. So for this, from this, the Ramban concludes that it's derabanan, giving precedence to the Gemara in Lamed Daled, and he reads the other two Gemaras as asmachta, and that's it. Right? That's basically the sum total of the Ramban's position. Rashi is a bit more complicated. So the Ramban's first question on Rashi, which was, why does Rashi in Zichron Trua only say Zichronot and Shofar and not Malchuyot? That's not a problem, I think, because again, the simple pshat of the Gemara on Daf Lamed Bet is that Zichron Trua is the source, if it's d'oraita, for Zichronot and Shofarot, and Malchuyot comes from a different part of the pasuk, which is Ani Hashem Elokeichem, I am God, which implies God's royal nature, and that's it. Right? That's so that's not a problem for me. But how does Rashi deal with d'oraita? So yesterday we dealt with three possibilities. Right, the smoothest in terms of conceptual is just say it's a machlokes sugyot, move on, no problem, we're done. Then we had two very what?
Also cop out.
Yeah, and I don't, and whenever you say it's machlokes sugyot, you need to really, you need to really check. Does that mean Rashi wouldn't agree with the halachic conclusion? But okay, it's a possibility. The other two that we saw are variations on a theme, right? One is to say brachot are derabanan, psukim, saying psukim are d'oraita, or alternatively, and that was the Taz and Divrei David, or saying something is biblical, but what you say, right? Not just brachot, but what you say, whether you say psukim, these psukim, other psukim, etc. That's all derabanan. And therefore, what Rashi is saying is, right, the way Rashi would read the sugya is, since I could fulfill my biblical mitzvah by saying something, some sort of prayer that is a nod towards Malchuyot Zichronot Shofarot or whatever, I could say any psukim, so that I don't need to go to shul to hear the entire thing in the context of Shemona Esrei, in the Amida, and therefore I should prefer shofar, right? But those are variations on the theme. One was closer to the Divrei David, one was closer to Rav Moshe Sternbach. Rav Moshe Sternbach just added, though, that he thinks that the more you say, everything integrates into the d'oraita. So if you daven all day, you say Tehillim all day, he thinks that's not just valuable, but it might actually be a kiyum d'oraita of saying Malchuyot Zichronot and Shofarot. It's not a chiyuv, but it is a kiyum. That was his addition. Okay.
I'm sorry. You fulfill more by doing it for longer? Like, what's the basis for that?
Yeah, it's like, think about it. It's the way the Gra talks about, and the Gra talks about eating matzah, right? You have to eat on the first night, but when you eat the rest of Yom Tov, it's a kiyum, right? It's not a chiyuv, but it is a mitzvah or sukkah, right? The first night you must have a kezayit in the sukkah. After that, technically, if you wanted to wander and walk, and go on tiyulim and not eat, sudo keva and whatever, and travel, you could, but you'd be avoiding a mitzvah. But if you sit in the sukkah, you obviously have a mitzvah d'oraita, but not a chiyuv d'oraita, right? Maybe that's a better formulation, right? It's a mitzvah, it's not a chiyuv, right? Meaning you've hit your minimum, but after that, it's still a kiyum. It's still part of the mitzvah. It integrates into the mitzvah. Okay, now I'm glad that the two of you also, are with me on this. But I as I said, at the end yesterday, I think the smoothest answer, in many ways, even though it's not found in earlier Achronim, is the one that Rav Asher Weiss suggests. I like it both conceptually, but I also think it works in the words so nicely. Like, it works so well in the language of the Gemara. So Okay, good. Gavi, why don't you summarize it for me, and then we'll look at it inside. But what does the Rosh claim?
The psukim, the ikar of the mitzvah is to have the shofar with the psukim. And so having psukim that are accompanied by shofar is doraita. But if you don't have the shofar with it, then just saying the psukim is derabbanan.
Exactly. Right. Rav Asher has this very nice claim, which is that until now, the assumption of the Great David, the assumption of Rav Sternbach, all of them, is that whatever value there is in saying the psukim, it's a kiyum in the day, right? It's a mitzvah hayom of Rosh Hashanah. And therefore, it stands independent of shofar, and that's basically how they would read the Gemara on Lamed Daled, that if there's a conflict between them, so then you got to choose. Rav Asher argues, no, you misunderstood. Saying Malchuyot Zichronot Shofarot is not a kiyum in Rosh Hashanah. It's not a mitzvah hayom. It's an aspect of the mitzvah of shofar. So if you have shofar, then it's a mitzvah d'oraita, because the mitzvah is to accompany the blowing of the shofar with tefillah, with recitation. The Gemara in Lamed Daled, the reason it calls it derabbanan is because you can only do one or the other. So then, saying psukim without the backdrop of shofar is derabbanan, right? It's like, right? It's like maror, right? Right? Maror, if I have Karban Pesach, so then maror is doraita, but it's not a mitzvah b'fnei atzma. It's a mitzvah to have the maror with the Karban Pesach. So if I don't have the Karban Pesach, so then biblically there's no value to having maror. But if I have the Karban Pesach, so then it's a mitzvah doraita. Now, I think, besides for the conceptual point, right? I mean, we'll read him inside in a second, but what's his best raya to this, I think, is that linguistically, it just works so beautifully in the Gemara. And I don't know how much more of a proof you need, but in Gemara on Tet Zayin, it just works. I just like it so much. It's such a nice read of Gemara, right? Because remember, the Gemara says, right here, Imru lefanai Rosh Hashanah, Malchuyot Zichronot Shofarot. Malchuyot K'dei shetamlichuni aleichem. Right? Say Malchuyot to make me king. Zichronot K'dei sheyaleh zichronam lefanai letova. Say Zichronot, so your commemoration will come to me as a blessing. Uvameh, and with what? The shofar. With the shofar. So the way Rav Asher reads it is, by going to his formulation, is now, Vululei Divrei Harishonim, right? This is always my favorite, Ray Clapper has said this several times. You might have heard it from him at some point, Gavi. Right, but there's all these like rabbinic terms that mean the opposite of what they say. So like lulei divrei Rishonim means if the Rishonim hadn't said what they said, I would have said this. Right? What that really means is it's a polite way of saying I don't agree with the Rishonim, but I can't say that. So what I'll say is, had the Rishonim not said it, this is what I would have said. But they said it, so I'm not saying this long elaborate thing I'm about to tell you. Right? It's a polite way of saying I really think I'm right, but I can't explicitly say that everyone else is wrong. Right? And then you have the fun one, right? Like Lulei de Misafina, if I weren't afraid to say X, right, then I would say it. So that means Lulei de Misafina is I have a big chiddush, right? Nir lafia nia dati, all these things I have a chiddush. I have a really big chiddush. I'm just afraid to say it, which means I'm not really afraid to say it. I just have to nod to the fact that I should be afraid to say it, or something like that. So that's what Rav Asher does here, right? You want to take it away? His Hebrew is very clear. Yep.
Lumei Divrei Harishonim, Hayanira L'Torah, L'Mark Emet, Havayamira Malchuyot Zichronot Shofarot Biblical. It seems that saying Malchuyot Zichronot Shofarot is the mitzvah d'oraita. Also, the Mashna, the Pastu, L'Shem the Gemara, and it seems from the shot of the language in the Gemara, Limat Darshu. Right. Elade insights Lehadi Kiat Shofar. The Pasha Diver Chazal and Lefanai Malchuyot Lefanai Zichronot Shofarot Tova Uva Med the Shofar. The Gedar Hadim the Ashla about at Kiat Shofar the Zikinu Rapashon Yane Malchuyot Shofarot. About Kishain, I know Shofar in Yan Gamir Malchuyot Zichronot Shofarot Biblical. Nikach Tiknu Chachamim Minkava Shal Tefillah Rosh Hashanah. Aval Sheyesh Get Shofar Yesh Beza Mitzvah D'Oraita. V'ate Shapir Masham Sham. Dim B'Makam Achad Takin B'Shofar V'Yer Achar B'Kol Nisaf. In Habrachot Elam Midrabanan Kilan She'en Imaham Get Shofar. V'Lichara Zudaras Nifla'at Le'Jav.
Right, so I love this last line, right? This is a beautiful way to explain it, but I'm not saying it, right? I am not saying what I just said, right? We showed him didn't say it, it's not true, right? But this is his Kiddush. I think it's beautiful. And again, he says it solves all three, right? It's a beautiful way to Dr. Zion, where it really does sound Bameh Bashofar, that the mitzvah is to say these psukim and daven with psukim and with the shofar. And in Daled, what he says is, that if you only had one or the other, so sure, the psukim without the shofar, that would be the Rabbanan. But if you had it, the shofar, so that would be all right. And that's how he reads this. I think, and again, lumdishly, what he's saying differently is that until now, everyone we've seen has assumed, and to be fair, this is true of both the Ramban and Rashi, that saying Malchuyot Zichronot Shofarot is a halacha in the Yom, right? It's a halacha in Rosh Hashanah. Rav Asher is the first one to say, no, it's not a halach in the shofar. Read the Gemara carefully. It's a din in the shofar, right? It defines the context by which we blow shofar, and if that's the case, so then it requires shofar. And again, I think Moror is the perfect parallel model where it's not a standalone biblical value. We do it nowadays as a mitzvah d'Rabbanan, but in the time of the Mikdash, it's d'oraita, but it's only d'oraita as a chelek, right, of the mitzvah of the Korban Pesach. Okay. Now, the middle possibility is based on the Ritva. Now, I should say before we look at the Ritva, I don't think that Rashi technically agrees with the Ritva, but the Ritva could be used to defend a Rashi-like position, and Rabbi Yashiv seems to actually go in that direction to defend a Rosh-like position. Okay, so either the Ritva is a third position in the Sugya, and he's definitely a third position in the Sugya, because the Ramban means totally D'Rabbanan, and there are definitely people who think Rashi means totally D'Oraita. The Ritva is a possible middle position. Actually, Rabbi Yashiv actually uses to explain the Ramban. So this is either a third view in the Sugya or a way of reading Ramban or a way of reading Rashi, probably an independent view. Okay. And that is that we've assumed until now that blowing the shofar is either totally d'oraita or it's totally d'Rabbanan, and it's binary choice, right? There are only two possibilities: biblical, rabbinic. But the Ritva suggests that it's not the case, right? That it's not d'oraita, and that's why on the Sugya Medalid you give precedence to shofar, because the shofar is a full-fledged d'oraita. But how do you use the language of Amra Torah and Id Karachmana, which sounds like it's in the Torah, is because it's not really D'Rabbanan either. It's not D'Rabbanan either. And the Ritva here, this is it's a life Ritva. You have to know this Ritva. Is the following. Most Rishonim think that what is an Asmachta? Most Rishonim, what do they think? It's a D'Rabbanan. And then what's the point of the pasuk?
In at the D'Rabbanan.
Variations on it, right? One is as a mnemonic, is that you'll remember it better if you attach it to a pasuk, right? Some Rishonim say it's just poetic. We like poetry. We like rhetoric, right? We like saying things in beautiful ways, right? Variations on a theme. And that is the position in most places of the Rambam, well, in all places of the Rambam, in most places of the Ramban, though, you wouldn't have seen this. 2 years ago, I saw this Ramban, not last year. The Ramban in one place sounds like he might entertain not this, but in most places, he says Asmachta is just totally D'Rabbanan. Ashi in many places sounds that way. Tosfot in many places sounds that way. The Kuzari sounds that way. It's a pretty well trod position in Rishonim. The Hakdama to Shas of the Maratz Chayes, and it is preceded in this by the in the Sefer Habatim of Rabbi Doda Kochavi, 14th century Provence, that he says very simply, the reason we have Asmachta is because the Torah used to be Baal Peh. The only thing that was Bechtav was Chumash, was Tanakh. And therefore, the more Derabanans you can attach to Psukim, the more likely that people will remember them, because, right, that's what they're reading as a text. So if you can, right, attach Derabanans to Psukim as mnemonics, then when they read the Pasuk, they'll remember the Derabanan. Right? And that's why it's better to attach it to a Pasuk. But most Rishonim think that Asmachta is a complete Derabanan. So once you say it's an Asmachta, right, it's a binary. It's not D'oraita. So it is fully and completely Derabanan. But the Ritva has this thesis that that's not the case, right? The Ritva, and this is the locus classicus for this position of the Ritva. Is this passage in Rosh Hashanah Zion? Okay, do you want to read it, or do you want me to go through it? Because I know you're having a little bit of trouble because it's complicated Ritva, but Masha Balach.
Yeah, we go with the language.
Yeah, towards the beginning, and then we kind of got a little bit easier, but.
Okay, so let's. I'll read the first few lines and I'll get you to his main thesis, and you can read it. Okay. So he says, "Had de parish batraita tam Rosh Hashanah mishum deidach ku deoraita akdaminu." Hello, Ezra. So this is that which it said in the latter case, right? Is because look, all the others are mamish deoraita, but the achi naga bracha Rosh Hashanah the inun derabana. Right, so in the Sugya and Lamadal, Shofar, Bracha, Dirabban. Because I mean, Mishilei Mechilton, I wrote, and that's the case we saw in Lamadal. I wrote, Bachat Token, Bachat Mevorchen, Hochel Makom, Shetoken, Hochel Makom, Shemevorchen, Afal Gav, Davadai, Vasafik. My time, Mahada, right, Dirabban. Right, that's the Sugya and Lamadal. Right, that if you have a choice to blow Shofar, say the Bracha, go to the place, even where you might blow Shofar, is biblical. And he says, because saying Malchuyot Zichronot Shofarot is not really D'oraita. So, so he's medayik that's why, right? Unlike what we said before, it doesn't. Amar Torah is not really going on Shofar; it's going on Nisach Hamayim. Okay, it uses a softer language, which is V'hadik Amar Hakadosh Baruch Hu Amar Lefanei Malchuyot Zichronot Shofarot. So here's what he's being medayik. Right, he's making the following. He's saying you're right. It's not D'oraita. But let's look at the Gemara carefully. Originally, we said that according to Rashi, he'll think that Amar Torah is going both on Hamayim and on the Psukim. But the Girsa, the Ritva, and you have to notice this is his Girsa in the Gemara. Though even without his Girsa, I think you could say it. His Girsa in the Gemara seems to have been Amar Torah Nischu Mayim Bechad and Amar Hakadosh Baruch Hu. Imru Fanei Rosh Malchuyot Zichronot Shofarot. Right? He thinks that there's a distinction. That this is not Amra Torah, Amra HaKadosh Baruch. God said, but the Torah didn't say. That seems to be his girsa, something along those lines in the Gemara. So therefore he says the following. 1 second. Here we go. V'hadik Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Imru Lefanei Malchuyot Zichronot Shofarot. Misho. Al gav de psuke Malchuyot Zichronot Shofarot einam min haTorah ela midirabanan kita parish. Saying the psukim is only dirabanan. Mikol makom mimash amra Torah zichron trua. Yesh lomod shraui lahazkir psuke trua psuke zikaron. It's dirabanan, but it's hinted to in the Torah because it says zichron trua. Umalchuyot nafkalan kemoshe darshu razal. Misifrei mi pasuk v'hayalachem l'zikaron lifnei elokechem ani Hashem elokechem. Right, you hint at Malchuyot from the end of the pasuk. Shinam lomer ani Hashem elokechem. Elazeh b'nei av v'chomakom shadam zichronot atasomech lo Malchuyot. Okay, and now he says umehacha. This is his key language. Umehacha samchu rabana l'takune hani psuke d'titiata. Based on the pasuk of Zichron Shua and ani Hashem elokechem, Chazal had an asmachta, right, a samchu, to say the psukim of Malchuyot Zichronot and Shofarot. You want to take it? Yuri, you want to take his key claim?
It's okay. I'll We were pointing out that we weren't sure. We thought it was someone either relying on or what did you thought it was?
Or juxtaposed.
No, it's samchu. They're making an asmachta, right? They're supporting it with, right? It's an asmachta, right? Okay, so yeah, take it away, Yodi. Umishum achi.
Ani Rabbi Akiva, she'amar kadosh baruch hu, amru l'ti Malchuyot Zichronot Shofarot Biblical. So because of this, Rabbi Akiva taught, right, to say that kadosh baruch hu says before me, yada yada. Shekol ma yesh lo asmachta min hapasuk. All this is an asmachta from the pasuk.
Right, because any asmachta, right? So here's what he says: it's not derabanan in the way you think it is. It's derabanan. How is it derabanan? I still remember learning this with Rai Friedman the first time in Rambam. Right. So what does he say? Right. So here's his wild claim. Right. What is asmachta?
It's something that Hashem is fit for like someone to make kovea something
by Masorah.
Right?
Well, right, meaning it's the way the Ritva understands it is a oraita is a mitzvah that God says you must do. And a smachta is God meant it, and therefore He hinted at it in the Torah. But you don't have to do it if you don't want to, and therefore it's not biblical. But if the Rabbanan choose to institute it, so then it's not pure derabanan. It's a derabanan which is choosing to formalize that which God already hid in the Torah. Right? So according to the Ritva, there are two levels of deoraita, so to speak. There's real deoraita where God said, do this in the Torah, you have to do it. And then there's asmachta, where God hid possibilities in the Torah and then gave the Rabbanan the choice. If you want to turn that hint into an all-out chiyuv, then you have a right to do it. And your quote-unquote Rabbanan is a fulfillment of God's underlying will. But if you choose not to institute it, then you have the right to not do what God wants you to do, because God didn't tell you have to. He just told you it was a good idea. Right? He hinted at it in the Torah. So an asmachta for the Ritva is somewhere in between. It's a rabbinic formalization of God's underlying will, but not command. Right? It's a very fancy formulation, but that's right. That's how the Ritva imagines a smachta.
And to be clear, the Ramban would generally disagree.
So in all places except for one, the Ramban seems to disagree. I shouldn't say that. I don't know all the Ramban in Kol HaTorah Kula. As far as I know, there is one place where the Ramban seems to suggest that he might accept something like the Ritva. And when I learned it with Rav Rosenzweig, he also noticed this in Ramban and did not know of any other Ramban that seems to imply that. So I don't know of any other Ramban where he says this. But in one place, the Ramban seems to agree. In one of his possibilities, in the mitzvah, in the halacha of Bal Tikru, right, of kirva to erva, right, of the limitations of, right, the derivative Yisurim of arayot, right, not hugging and kissing and whatever of one of the arayot. So there he implies that he might entertain a ritva like asmach, might. But usually, yes. Usually, 99.9% of the time, the Ramban doesn't agree with the Ritva's view on asmachta. And he says, like the Rambam, that it's just a hint. And therefore, when he says, it's just a Rabbanan, he means it's just a Rabbanan.
Do we often find, this is the second time I'm going through a sugya where Rashi and the Ramban take different sides of the asmachta deraisa coin. Is that something you find often?
You find it a lot. Meaning the challenge of asmachtas is that they go to pasuk and they might be derabanan. It's a very common problem to have.
Yeah.
But this is like I said, but this Ritva you have to know, because Ritva, right, changes the game by saying there's a middle category. Right? Now again, I don't think this is really Rashi, but it is a way of defending all three, right? It's a third derech, which is to say, yes, it's derabanan in the sense that it's derabanan, meaning it's not doraita. But you can say Amra Torah or Amra Kadosh Baruch Hu, because It's not pure derabanan. It's actually God's underlying will. It's an asmachta. And then he goes farther and he says, "V'lo k'divrei mafarshim ha'asmachtot shu k'derech siman shenatnu chachamim." An asmach is not like the majority of Rishonim who think it's just a hint, right? A sign, a mnemonic device to make you remember. V'lo shekavanat Torah lakach, and that it's not what the Torah actually meant. Chas v'shalom. God forbid that's what it means. Yishtakeya hadavar v'lo yomar. May such a position be said and not said. Shazu da'at minut hu. Because it is heresy, right? I mean, he has very harsh language for the majority position in Rishonim, in Rambam, Ramban, Rashi, Tosfot, Kuzari, whatever, etc. Okay, fine. Aval haTorah he'ira b'kach. The Torah enlightened you about this. Umasra chiyuv hadavar l'kvol l'chachamim im yirtzu. It gave the rabbis the choice whether or not to implement it as obligation. Kemoshe ne'amar v'asita al pi hadavar she'yigidu lecha. Ulefichach timtzach chachamim nodim b'chol makom raya ozecher o asmachta l'devarhem. That's why the rabbis always look for an asmachta. Not just to help you remember, but because that shows you that they believe they're channeling on the underlying value of the Torah itself. Klomar she'ena mechadshim davar milibam. They're telling you this isn't a rabbanan that we made up. The kol Torah sheba'al peh rumuza b'Torah shebechtav, and all of the oral Torah is hinted at in the written Torah. Shehi tmima, which is perfect and complete. V'chas v'shalom shehi chasera klum. God forbid that the Torah is missing anything. Right. So the third possibility in this sugya. You want to say hello? You want to learn the Ritva? Yes. Okay. Yeah, it's a fascinating Ritva. You can listen. Okay. Yeah. Yes, you can listen. Okay. That the Ritva, right, comes up with a third possibility. Right. He says there isn't a binary. D'oraita means the Torah commands it. Pure d'Rabbanan means the rabbis made it up. Asmachta means that God built in optional mitzvah to the Torah itself and gave the rabbis the choice, if they want to take him up on his suggestions. Right? Again, it's a wild position. It's absolutely wild. Right? Meaning it's, right? He's saying that people either listening to his suggestions or choosing not to take his suggestions seriously. Right? That was fine. But therefore, if you do it, right, if you take him up on it, it's a derabanan, but not really. Now, for him, therefore, it's very easy. The sugya on Lamed Dalet is saying Malchuyot Zichronot and Shofarot is derabanan when compared to blowing shofar, which is a pure doraita. But it's authentic to say that Amra HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that God said it on Tet Zayin and Lamed Bet, because God did say it and He did mean it. He just didn't obligate it. He suggested it kindly, right? God, He encouraged it at some point for people to take Him up on His suggestions to say Malchuyot Zichronot and Shofar. Now, I highly doubt this is what Rashi means. Right? Rashi sounds like it's pure Doraita. But we should acknowledge that theoretically, if you really wanted to, and again, I think it would be a stretch in the reading, you could read the Ritva both into the Ramban or Rashi. Right? Meaning, right, the fact that the Ritva is somewhere in the middle means if you wanted to, you could say that's what the Ramban really means. Right? Which is...
How would you read the Ramban?
Meaning, if you wanted to believe, right? Meaning, the Ritva says it is a derabanan. It's just not a regular derabanan, right? So, if you wanted to, you could say, "Oh, the Ramban means that too." I don't think he does. But again, I believe what I'm saying. I'm saying the Ramban in 99% of the places makes it clear that he thinks asmachta means pure derabanan, that it's just a mnemonic. If that's the case, then obviously he doesn't say the same as the Ritva. Rashi, when he says Doraita, seems to really think it's Doraita, right? And therefore, so you could, if you wanted to, read it into Rashi or read it into the Ramban. I don't think it's true. I think it's a third position of the Sugya, right? Meaning, the Ramban thinks it's purely Darabanan. The Rashi thinks it's purely Doraita with one of the 3 or 4 defenses that we've already seen. And the Ritva says, I have a better solution to your problem. It is Darabanan compared to real Doraita. But it's not regular derabanan, so it's legitimate to say that Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that God said it, because He did say it, He did command it. And that's what, for the Ritva, asmachta always is. Now, Now there are potential nafkaminas to this, right? There is this the Pri Chadash in his Pticha Koleles or Psicha Koleles, whatever you want to call it, right? His introduction to his Perush on Arachayim, or really on Shulchan Aruch, in Aleph Chaf, has a chiddush, and he says that even though normally we say Safek derabanan lekula, if it's Safek derabanan with an asmachta, he thinks yol l'chomra. Right? That's the Pri Chadash's chiddush. And Rabbi Yosef Engel in the Beit Otzar suggests he has two possibilities, but I'll leave his first possibility is wild, and he doesn't agree with it, and then he says it's heresy and whatever, and he's not really saying it. His concluding possibility is that the reason you would say something like the Pri Chadash is if you held like the Ritva. Right? That if you think that Asmach is not a real Dirabanan, it's a Dirabanan are channeling God, right? And they're obligating you in what God wanted, but only made optional. So then it makes sense to say that Safek Asmach L'chumra, because it's somewhere in between Daraita and Dirabanan. So that's his suggestion. There is, by the way, one more possibility of what a smachta is, and that's really weird. Right? Maharil has this piece that a smachta is that when the rabbis set up a rule, but they were afraid that people wouldn't take the rule seriously, they made an asmachta to trick people into thinking it was doraita so that they would take it seriously. Right? That's Maharil, which is wild. That made what the Rambam thinks Baal Tosef is. It's really a problematic position in the Maharil, and that's what Rabbi Yosef Engel really doesn't like. But we'll leave that. But it's odd for now. Maybe another time we can explore the Maharil in more depth. Okay, but those again, like I said, I agree with Yudi. You could, if you wanted to push and didn't care about reading so much, you could either shove the Ritva into Rashi or the Ramban. The most likely explanation is that the Ritva is a third position in the Sukkah, right? A unique position in the Sukkah. Is that
definitely to say that if we want to say it the other way, which one seems to be attacking more than the other? Definitely the Ramban. He goes on about how you can't. It's bad to read.
Correct. And this particular one, if I had to say which one he's closer to, I'd say Rashi, right? Because he's offended by the notion that it's just Dirabanan. Right? He's offended by that notion. So yes, but again, my tendency is to think that the Ritva is really a third position in the Sugya, and that's it. It's a third very important position in the Sugya, but it's a third model in the Sugya. Now, I just gave you Rabbi Yashiv, who basically goes in this direction, and he says, "Katav yesh lomar," he quotes from the Sefer Yom Trua. Right? When it's not derabanan, it's just not explicit in Torah. And his proof is the following. There's a very weird Rambam in the 17th parak of Kalim in Perush Mishnayot who says that divrei sofrim can mean anything from it's derabanan to it's deoraita, but it's learned from the Yod Gimel Midot and therefore is not explicit in the pasuk. And divrei sofrim is an amorphous category that includes all of that, right? So things that are pure derabanan to things that are basically deoraita, but without a pasuk. So Rabbi Yashiv basically suggests that maybe based on Yom Trua that's what this is. That it's really deoraita, right? Now this is why I said Rabbi Yashiv is taking a Ritva-esque position and reading it into Rashi, right? And what he's saying is, blowing the shofar is doraita. Saying the psukim is doraita. So why do you call it derabanan? Not because it's derabanan. It's just less deoraita than blowing the shofar because it's a deoraita without an explicit pasuk, which makes it a weaker deoraita. Now that's, I think, more extreme than the Ritva, right? The Ritva doesn't seem to think that asmachta is deoraita or derabanan. It's a middle category, right? Rabbi Yashiv is saying maybe it's almost deoraita, or it is deoraita, but it's a lower level deoraita, right? Not a middle category called asmachta, but a deoraita minus, which is very close to the Ritva, but maybe a little bit stronger. But he's using that really to defend a Rashi-like position, which is to say, yeah, saying the psukim is d'oraita is just not explicit in the pasuk, so you can call it d'Rabbanan, because something which is d'oraita but without a pasuk is more d'Rabbanan-like than something that has an explicit pasuk. Yeah, I don't like it either. I get it. My tendency is to think that the Ritva and this Yom Trua that quoted about early Yashiv are really middle positions, right? That Rashi says d'oraita mamish. How does he deal with stira? So again, we've seen several possibilities: either stira d'sugyot or psukim d'Rabbanan, psukim d'oraita, brachot d'Rabbanan, or saying something is d'oraita, what you say is d'Rabbanan, or like Rav Asher Weiss, saying it without shofar, d'Rabbanan, saying it as a kiyum and shofar, d'oraita. But then you have a middle position, the Ritva and the Yom Trua, which is no. It's neither d'oraita nor d'Rabbanan. It's a middle category. The Ritva call that a smachta, which is God built in advice to the Torah, but he didn't make you take it. But if you take his advice, so then you are channeling God. So it's still a lower level than shofar, which is a straight up chiyuv, but it's better than a regular d'Rabbanan. Or the Yom Trua, which is, it's a d'oraita minus, right? It's a d'oraita without a pasuk. Again, I find these to be mechudash. As a third position, it's fine. As an interpretation of Rashi or the Ramban, it would be very problematic. But someone might want to do it. Okay. So that is that. Now, as I gave you here, I think we've gone through almost all the Achronim I gave you, except for the long one. I don't want to read the whole Mordechai. Like that's insane. It's very, very long. But I gave you a few other answers in Achronim, so I'll run through it. One was from before we get to Maimar Mordechai, was a fascinating answer in the Yan Yosef. Again, I'm not compelled by this, but here's another defense of Rashi. I'll just read you his conclusion. Valpiz yesh lomar lefinu yedaiti debechal b'Shabbat she'ein token az haskar tzukei shover l'chiyav min haTorah. He says, here's how it goes. It's a basically a half acceptance of Bavli and Yerushalmi, but it's the inverse of Rav Asher Weiss, right? Rav Asher Weiss says it's only d'oraita to read the psukim when you have the shofar. The Raya and Yosef based on the Yerushalmi suggests the opposite, which is when you're blowing the shofar, so then you don't have to say psukim. It's only Rabbanan. But on Shabbos, when you don't blow the shofar, so then saying the psukim is d'oraita. Why? Because the Yerushalmi says, right, and the Bavli says it in Tavamina that Yom Trua means you blow the shofar, and Yom Zichron Trua means you talk about the shofar. So what he says, maybe what Rashi is telling you is that on Shabbos, when you don't blow the shofar, then saying the psukim is d'oraita. But during the week, when you're blowing the shofar, so then in a Chanami, you give preference to the shofar, because then saying the psukim is only d'Rabbanan. Right? That's his chiddush. Right? It's a very fascinating chiddush. I don't know if it's true. I don't think it is. But that's his suggestion. And therefore he says, the Ramban challenged Rashi and said, how could you say Zichron Shua means saying the psukim? Etc. He says, he said, but here's my defense of Rashi. That's not asmachta. The pasuk means that Kishaim token Mahmad is a siba, that whenever you don't blow the shofar for whatever reason, az yomru psuke trua, then you have a biblical obligation to say the psukim instead. Vudrasha gemura, it's a straight up pasuk. And therefore, but his thesis is even farther, like this. It's that what the words Zichron Trua mean are that whenever, for whatever reason, you can't blow the shofar, you have a mitzvah d'oraita to do a makeup by saying psukim. So let's say you just didn't have a shofar, you'd be biblically obligated to say psukim. And once Chazal say you're not allowed to blow the shofar on Shabbat, so now, because you're bound by the D'Rabbanan, you have a mitzvah d'oraita to say the psukim on Shabbat, because anytime you can't blow the shofar, you have a mitzvah to say the psukim. And that's how he's machadesh. It says that Zichron Trua the reason Rashi can interpret it is not that you always need to say the psukim. Is that when you don't blow the shofar, you need to take Rosh Hashanah, a Yom Zichron Trua. That's his suggestion, right? So, let's just write down what we have for Rashi, right? Possibility 1, right, was Malchuyot Zichronot, right? 2 is Brachot are Derabanan, Sukkim, Doraita. 3 was say something that's biblical, but what to say is Derabanan. At 4 was a Rosh Weiss is Doraita only with shofar. Right? Now the Vayan Yosef is only Doraita without shofar. Right? Right? And then we had, obviously, Ramban, who just says, Derabanan, and all counter evidence is Mira Smachta. And then you got Ritva, which is, it's, right, a middle level. It's more Derabanan than Shofar, but closer to Doraita than pure Derabanan, right? And there was that, right, the Yom Trua said basically the same thing, right? That it's a Doraita minus. That's what we've seen basically so far, okay? Right, that's everything we've seen. Okay, the last source, and again, we don't have to read the whole thing, but the longest and most thorough attempt at analyzing the sugya that I could find was in the Mordechai. So let's just look at it for a little bit. I won't not read it all inside, but we'll just skim it. Right, so he quotes Geder Amir Psuke Malchuyot Zichronot Shofarot. Right, what is the nature of the obligation? So he quotes the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah Tet Zayin. Right, and he notes that it sounds like an Agadah. So maybe you would think it's not a reason things Doraita. The problem is that this Agadic statement is quoted by the Rif, right, which is what leads you to believe that maybe it has halachic valence. Okay, so he goes, right, he quotes everybody here. He quotes the Shiltei Giborim. Right, he quotes here. Right? Rashi says it's Doraita, Ramban says Derabanan. Right, pretty clear. Just like you have to blow the shofar, you have to say the psukim. Doraita, and he quotes several Rishonim who say this. Right, and again, if you want a full treatment, you'll see he has person after person. Then he quotes Tosfot and the Rosh, Derabanan. Right, the brachot are Derabanan. And here he is here. Ayin Chazanish. He said the Chazanish also saw 3 understandings of the sugya. Dot Rashi had tkiyot ma'avot et habracha. Dot Tosfot chelek me'abrachot ma'akev chelek sheni. Chelek me'akev chelek sheni. This is more about the bracha. Yeah, no, you know what? The Chazanish has 3 interpretations. One that it's without the tkiyot, you're not making for the bracha. The Ran is the opposite. That without the bracha, you're not, right? You need both brachot and shofar, and Tosfot is part of the brachot or ma'akev, some of it. Okay, all right, he goes on. I don't know if I really want to go through all of this. The Makor of Rashi. Here, okay, this is where Rashi has to defend Rashi. He says, that which they ask on Rashi, from the Gemara on Lamed Daled, right? So how do you deal with it? So he says, Madua. So he says, so here, remember I said it's Machlokes HaSugyot. This is from the Maimer Mordechai, right? His first answer is, it's Machlokes HaSugyot, right? That's where it comes from. Rashi has Birshak Gemara. He lokis Radosh Rabbi Akiva. Right? So his first answer is, how do you defend Rashi? Machlokes HaSugyot. That's all. Rabbi Akiva thinks it's all right. The other thinks it's not. And he says, Yeter has bear, to push it further. And then this is just worth seeing because it brings us back to the shofar on Shabbat issue. Do a lo tokim b'Rosh Hashanah shechal b'Shabbat. Right? Gemara, right? Zichron Trua Yom Trua. And Rashi there it said, Zichron Trua, velo Trua mamash, elam mikrot shel Trua yomru. So he says, then you quote Gzera Derabba. So he says, Imkain Shnei Psugim Ela Medabra B'chol Rosh Hashanah Yom Trua Zetkiat Shofar Zichron Trua Ela Psukim Tzvichim Lomar V'Zechar Do. Right? There's an Karot L'Shitat Rashi. Right? The way Rashi reads the sugya in Lamed on Chavtet is not that we totally reject the drasha. It's that we agree that Zichron Trua means you need to read Psukim. It's just as we said before. You need to read the Psukim and blow the shofar. Right? That's how Rashi takes it. And then he notes that the Ramban and Tosfot think it's Derabanan, and if you're in, you can just look. I'll just run through and show you what's here. We won't do it inside, but he notes that Beirut Dat HaRambam goes through which one he thinks the Rambam is like, and then he does Ladat HaRitzvah, which is what he calls Brachot Ke'en Doraita, right? The third possibility, which is it's neither Doraita nor Derabanan, it's Ke'en. It's sort of like Doraita. As he summarizes it, it's the will of God. It's just not D'oraita. And then the fourth position, as we noted, is the Yom Trua that was also on Rebbe Yashiv, which is that it's Divrei Sofrim, which is D'oraita minus. Okay? And here he notes that you could, if you want, use it to defend Rashi. Right, and that's what we saw. He has a lot of other things. He deals with the question of whether this is only B'tzibur or even B'yachid. Right, as you see, right. Here's his summary. Okay, we'll end with this. Okay, you don't have to read his whole tshuva. Here's his executive summary of all the possibilities. V'ha'askin and v'ha'achtin, and this is the end. Malchuyot Zichronot Shofarot Yesh Omrim Doraita. Some say biblical. Yesh Omrim Ke'en Doraita. Some say sort of biblical. Yesh Omrim Derabanan, and some say it's Derabanan. Utkia be'emtza atfila. Blowing the shofar during davening, but Musaf Chaver with the tzibur. Zu takana miyuchedet b'malchuyot kedei shetam lichuni aleichem. That's a kiyum in making God king. Ve'acher kach, and that will lead that God will remember us. Uvamen, how do you do it? B'shofar. Dahainu lomar gam psuki shofar v'kitet shofar. Say the gim and blow the shofar. V'lochein harambam hamuva le'el natan tam to get shofar midin shenim, and that's the reason the Rambam blowing the shofar is waking up people from their sleep. V'aliba d'chulei alma ikar tefillah hu shetam lichuni aleichem. However you take it, the point of tefillah is to think about making God our king. Uledidhu shofar hu emtsa'i lam lachalas karal tova. And shofar is the tool we use to do that. Had Omer Adam hamitpalel b'Rosh Hashanah, when someone davens in Rosh Hashanah umazkir malchiyot and mentions God's kingship, this is very important. Sheyeda kol po'ul ki atah fe'alto v'yavin kol yata yitzarto Omar kol asher shama ba'po Hashem Elokeinu melech u'malchuto b'chol mashallah. You should have in mind when davening that everyone has to know that God is king and God is our creator. The imlav, and if you don't have in mind with your tefillah, with the shofar blowing God king, lo yatsa yedei chovato, then you didn't fulfill your obligation. And therefore you have to have kavanah. Hein v'tefillah lachashum mitpalel, whether it's your primary esrei, hein b'shmiya, shatz b'chazara, or chazara shatz, chiyot shetam lichuni aleichem, that God is our king, u'v'zichronot shakadosh baruch hu yiskartan l'tova, u'levrachai deishanu tokim b'shofar, and in zichronot that God should remember us, v'yizgor lanu zchuto shel Yitzchak alom ben Avram Avinu alom, and remember the merit of the Akedah, kilo akadnu et atzmeinu lefanav hashofar bal orer, as if we tied ourselves on the edge. Kor h'shmiyan kol shofar shum chavana rak matzat ratzon abarit barash mavit haleh. Blow the shofar and think about doing God's will. And whether you take Rashi, Rambam, doesn't matter, right? All of these, right? The point is that whether you think it's Doraita, whether you think it's Rabban, whether you think it's Asmachta, blowing the shofar and saying the psukim, saying the brachot, there's a theme that it's aiming at. And just to keep that in mind. It's saying the word, and in my mind said Doraita. The Ramban thinks it's Derabanan. The Ritva is what God wants. It's just not obligatory. But everyone agrees. If you ask what is the values that we're trying to accomplish, both from Tefillah, it's that we want to make God king, accept him as king upon ourselves, that we want to do tshuva and have God remember us for good, those things are true, whether it's Doraita, Darabanan, or Asama. So that's his summary of the sugya. He has some more nuanced positions, but as we've seen basically 7 different possibilities here, right? Ramban, Ritva, and 5 different ways of defending Rashi. I still think Rav Asher Weiss is the nicest, but that's me. Okay, good. Enjoy your trip, and we'll
Thursday. Probably next Thursday.
next Thursday.